is now called to order. Work session items. We have 2 items for discussion tonight. Discussion on the FEMA flood plan mapping from the city engineer, and annual redevelopment ready board and commission discussion to identify and prioritize redevelopment sites. Is there any public comment on the agenda items? We will move on to the first item, discussion on FEMA floodplain mapping, city engineer Sean Middleton.
Good evening, Council. I was asked by Thad to do a brief update on the ongoing floodplain mapping that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is in the process of doing right now. And also associated with that is a Great Lakes coastal study. It's a very large study that's been happening over the last 5 or 6 years, so they're tied together. And I'll run through some slides here, and if we can do questions and answers, or questions and discussion at the end. So just to start out, to give a little sense, the current floodplain maps that are for the city of Manistee were adopted in 1987. And they're depicted on this old map here, paper map, with the gray areas. So everything in gray there is the current floodplains within the city of Manistee city limits. That map was based on an elevation, a floodplain elevation of 584 feet, and it was consistent whether it was along Lake Michigan or Manistee Lake or within the channel. That elevation, the floodplain elevation, is consistent across all those water bodies. And for the most part, the floodplain is contained within these water bodies. Along the edges, there's a few properties that are impacted and some buildings. But in general, the city of Manistee has very limited impact from floodplains. So, and the reason they're important is regulatory-wise, whether it's buildings you're constructing or permitting with the DEQ, there's a lot of things that are dependent on whether or not you're working within a floodplain. So this is the historical information. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Association of State Floodplain Managers are working together, or have been working together, on what's called the Great Lakes Coastal Flood Study. And that started in about 2010. And that's a very comprehensive study. It's looking at all 5 of the Great Lakes, all the shorelines within the United States, in terms of what are the impacts on the shoreline from the Great Lakes themselves. So between water elevations and waves, what are the impacts on the shorelines? And those directly relate to floodplain issues. And there's a lot of data, a lot of modeling, weather modeling, wave modeling, looking at buoy data, elevation data for 100 years worth. But really it just boils down to 3, for us, I think it only boils down to a couple things. In the end, they're developing an elevation that'll be used for mapping. And along the shoreline, it's based on 3 things. One is what they call the still water elevation of Lake Michigan. That's the normal day-to-day elevation of the lake. And they look at the 100-year recurrence on that. So it's a rare height. And it's about 582. And for everybody that recalls, in 1986, when the lake levels were very high, that's very close to what they're calling the still water 100-year elevation. It's within a half a foot of that elevation. On top of that, they look at what's called wave setup and wave run up. And setup is when waves are crashing into the shoreline and the wind's driving on shore, you get a kind of a little bit of lift in the lake. The water elevation goes up locally to the shoreline because it's almost like a surge, and all that water will go up. And this is still offshore, and it kind of artificially, or not artificially, but increases the elevation of the lake locally due to the waves running up. They call that wave setup. On top of that, there's what's referred to as wave run up, and this is the actual waves breaking on the shore and running up the shoreline. So what FEMA does in analyzing it is they look at the still water elevation plus wave setup plus wave run up. And this study was all over all the Great Lakes, but they call them transects, cross sections, and they analyzed different places all up and down the coast. there was 3 or 4 of these transects that cut through Manistee. And for each one, they have a whole set of data, and this was just an example of one near Fifth Avenue Beach. The key points here is that still water elevation they're calling out is 582.2 for Lake Michigan, and then the wave run out is estimated to be 587. So the still water is 2 feet below what it was in the old floodplain maps, but the wave run up, what they're actually going to use as the base flood elevation or the mapping elevation, is 3 feet higher. So on September 19th, Denise from the city attended a meeting, a coastal hazard analysis flood risk review workshop or meeting. And the purpose of that was several things. One is they reviewed this coastal analysis and the study and talked a little bit about methods and results. But one of the deliverables or products is what they call work maps, very kind of preliminary maps that show where the floodplains could likely be based on the results of that study along Lake Michigan. And so preliminary work maps were put together, shared with the group, and then at that point, they were given 60 days. All the municipalities within the County of Manistee were given 60 days to comment, to provide comments back to them based on what was provided to us. And I'm just gonna, real quick, I'm gonna go to a, the way they provided that information was in the form of an interactive website. And so they put all their mapping on basically a GIS platform, and you can go in and look at the data. And what I want to do is just kind of quickly give you a little taste of what that mapping looks like and what it impacts in the city. So this is, just zooming out, here's the city, obviously Manistee Lake and the channel. And the area kind of shown in this peat green type color is what they're proposing for the floodplain. And that's based on that elevation of 582 in Manistee Lake. Back here, we're actually using 582, which is 2 feet lower than the previous maps. However, the mapping is could use some work because there's places where they show buildings and structures in the floodplain. I think this is the Reith Riley. They show a building in here. And there's several places that I'll just kind of scan along. One thing pointing out is the wastewater treatment plant. Based on their map and the way they did it, it shows that a good portion of the wastewater treatment plant would be in the floodplain. I believe that a good portion of the plant is out, and we can get survey data to confirm that. But there'll be a process we'll continue to go through and work with FEMA where these type of items can be brought up and shared and then can be revised. For the most part along here, there's no really impacts from on buildings. Up on the peninsula, the floodplain is close to several buildings, but it's not shown really going into them. I'm just going to jump across the channel real quick. On the north side of the city limits, north of the Arthur Street Boat Launch, I think it's Bayview Condos, if I'm saying that right.
Mm-hmm.
They're showing them right, the floodplain is literally right at the face of them. Doesn't mean they're in or not, but the way it's mapped shows that they could potentially have flood insurance impacts. The only other really
That boat's gonna float. That boat's gonna float.
up by Joslyn Cove, very close again, and in the undeveloped sites it shows it crossing onto them. Again, this is just how they mapped it. They didn't have very good elevation data along the shoreline. We have done work a couple of years ago with LiDAR data where we scan the shoreline and we can share that with them if we were to potentially improve these lines. So that's some coordination we can look at doing with FEMA. Then at the north end we show potentially one more building, corner of it in. So there's a few structures, the way they map it are shown in, even though the elevation they're mapping to is lower than floodplain. So it's just really a question of how they're mapping it. Along the channel, there's really not too many impacts on structures or buildings. It does show Edgewater, right up to the face of Edgewater, and I know this is off because the seawall we put in a year ago, is the top of that is at 584.5. So this is truly mapped to 582, it'd be 2.5 feet below that seawall, so that line should be well up, it should be out in this area. So there's just a lot of those items when they get to their actual, what they call flood insurance rate mapping, we'll look at. So there's a few impacts here, down here it's showing it very high, we don't necessarily agree with that, we'll have to work with them on that. But those are mapping items, they're how they do it. What we're more concerned about is things related to the study and how they're using the data. And our biggest concern with FEMA's rate is actually near the outlet near Fifth Avenue Beach. This line here depicts two different elevations they're using for mapping. So to the right of this, they're using an elevation of 582. To the left of it, they jump to an elevation of 587. And then they use that for mapping. And you can kind of see this whole area here, I'm going over, is all mapped to this elevation of 587. And this area, all along Fifth Avenue, all these homes here and along the marina are all shown as being in on the maps that were presented at the meeting that Denise attended. So we had some immediate concerns with that because what that's saying is, when that waves run up to 587, that elevation's kind of a flat line going all the way across through past these homes and into the marina, which we know is not the case because what they're saying is it's cresting the top of the beach, the high point of the beach, and then it's staying that high. So we immediately sent that back to them and asked them to revise it, and they looked into that. And I'm going to switch out here. So again, this is the historic map of that location at Fifth Avenue. And like I mentioned, it was prepared in 1987. And so it doesn't, the marina's not there, Lakeshore Drive doesn't go all the way through. But even with that, they weren't showing the floodplain up into Lakeshore Drive. It wasn't mapped at that time. So your current maps don't include any of these homes that are in the proposed maps. So when we brought it up to them about our concern here, they came back with just some color mapping. It's still the same thing, but the red showing this elevation of 587, this light area is actually above the elevation of 587, so it's out of the floodplain. It's the parking lot area at Fifth Avenue, and the green is the 582. So when we received this, we emailed back and said we have concerns about that and how it's mapped. And in response, they sent another map, FEMA representative. They have a contractor, an engineering firm that does the work, and we're working directly with them. And what they sent back to us was this map. So the yellow is still reflecting the elevation of 587. So the Coast Guard's still mapped at this elevation. The area in, I guess, that greenish color is they're treating it different now. And so two things happened. One is this gray area. They took that right out and said that's not in the floodplain anymore based on their mapping. And then they said the green area is not that fixed elevation of 587, but they feel, at least FEMA feels, that water that could potentially go over the beach could run across the road around their homes and into the marina. So it's a pretty unique situation, but that's how they feel about it. And so they map it at what's called the AO zone. And AO is means it's mapped by depth. So it's water running by the home and then going into the marina, as opposed to an AE, which is that flat elevation. So if it was previously mapped, the water would have been 3 or 4 feet by 2 to 4 feet, depending on which house you're at along here. And this mapping is going to indicate it's a couple feet, running by it or a foot. All that we need to learn more details from FEMA, and we're corresponding back and forth. So this was one of our concerns areas, and we're working with them on it. We've made some progress by getting to this map. I'd like to make more, but I'm not sure how far we'll get with them. So they're kind of in the beginning of the mapping process for the county of Manistee. And the first part was really the study and the work maps that Denise attended the meeting, and we did some preliminary review on it. The next step they're going to be doing is what's called the actual firm mapping. They produce the actual maps that will become the official documents used for regulatory purposes. And that's got a whole series of, a whole process. They do issue preliminary maps. They have a floodplain management production meeting or workshop. And in that, they talk about administratively how you use these maps and what's in them. And it's also a chance to provide some review comments. And then from that point, it moves into more of a public standpoint, working with the communities and issuing notices and having meetings with the actual public, not just at the administrative level. And ultimately, at the end of that, they issue official maps, and they become the new effective maps for the city of Manistee. And at that time, you need to issue a new ordinance that references these new maps. They got to, the ordinance needs to point to the correct maps. That's the next meeting, as I mentioned, will be this floodplain management workshop. And again, that's to review the maps and talk a lot about administrative items. So for the city of Manistee, specific to us in the immediate future, I think we need to keep talking with FEMA about getting these maps improved and getting them data and trying to get better products out. And then we'll attend this floodplain management workshop whenever it's scheduled. It's not scheduled yet. And then we'll review these preliminary maps when they're issued. So there's a lot more that'll happen after that, but in the immediate, future, that's what we'll be working on. And that's kind of a short synopsis of what they're going through for the last 6 years. Any questions?
If you don't get these nuances worked out with FEMA, the waste treatment plant and the property on the north side, et cetera, all the examples that you gave, how does that impact us if they remain in the flood zone? And how long is this permanent map in effect? What's the next date? I guess I'm trying to get to, it's really important for you to get this done and get this worked out with them, because it affects a lot of other things. Maybe people's homeowners insurance, could affect, I'm guessing, maybe funding if we're gonna put in a water basin retention, or.
Yes, it'll definitely affect two areas. One, privately, homeowners, directly flood insurance, which has only gotten more and more expensive. I don't know, we may not be as familiar with it here because we don't have a lot of it, but flood insurance has gotten to be very expensive.
Yeah, about 3 times what normal homeowners is.
Exactly, and it's so it's a very big issue privately on homes and value and resale and all those. So that's a driving factor. And what FEMA does, it's kind of sad, but what they do is they put that onus on they issue these maps and they put them out there. And once they're adopted, the onus is on the landowner, the property owner, if they believe they're out, to get themselves out. So they have to hire a surveyor, do a letter of map amendment, and then they can be, in essence, declare it out if all the elevations work out. So and then on the public side, it does affect a lot of things. It'll affect the permitting, any work we do in the floodplain, like the basin, or work around the plant. We have to pull permits. You can't fill in a floodplain without mitigating it. So if you fill some, you need to cut some other place. There's a lot of criteria that will drive costs about being in a floodplain. And the other aspect of it too is more on the probably planning or zoning side of it, and that is building in a floodplain. There's criteria where you need to set a finished floor at a certain elevation and build the structure up, and you're limited on fill. So there's a lot of criteria there too, just from a development standpoint. So it is very important, and FEMA doesn't bend very easy.
That's what I was afraid you were going to say.
Yeah, we've been through this, and we'll just I'm going to keep the dialogue with our FEMA contractor in the study. There's probably a good chance there'll be a different engineer or contractor actually doing the D-firm mapping. And if whoever that is, we'll find out who it is, and we'll just get the dialogue going with them too. But one thing I was just talking to Jeff about is I think we have the data that we bought a couple, we invested in 3 or 4 years ago with the LiDAR mapping, and that could improve drastically, that mapping along the channel in the river or the lake. So we'll look at sharing that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item, annual redevelopment ready commission board and commission discussion to identify, prioritize redevelopment sites. Denise?
Yes, annually under our RRC program, we have to have a joint meeting. That includes city council. We invited members from the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, the DDA, Historic District Commission, Planning Commission, and the ZBA. So we will kind of go over what we've done in the past. We have had annual meetings. Our first one was in June of 2015, and our last one was in December of 2016. And I had sent you an update, and we had our 215 sites that we have removed from consideration. As you can see, the list is actually quite long. We have removed the Port City Christian Fellowship Church. That's because we received no response from the owner. Little Caesars, that property was in litigation. The Consumers property, we did not obtain any approval to list any of their properties. The former First Street Tavern, we have a new business there, the Black Dog. GT Tire is now Memory Lane Detailing. Joslyn Cove, the developer is supposed to be restarting the project. The Milwaukee House was sold, and the new owner is renovating that property. The Roadway Inn, that motel has reopened. Liquid Dust was sold to Reith Riley, and they're expanding their operations onto that property. The former Ringo Tire, the owner utilizes that building as a warehouse. The 5 vacant lots on the peninsula. Right now, 3 of those parcels are under a purchase agreement along with the Ironworks property. The former Candy Mountain and Sibbin Street, there was new owners in 2016. They have done some renovations to the upstairs of that building. And then the Manistee Cottage Gardens, we have a new business in there, which is Glorious Flowers. And the 2016 sites that we removed the Sangs property, that would be 200 River Street. There was no response from the owner. The Hotel Northern property, the owners right now are working on a new development plan. We pulled off the Ironworks because we have a purchase offer on the building. Same with former dry cleaners. Riley's Bait and Tackle has been sold, and the new owner is renovating that property. The H&K building was sold, and we have a new owner also renovating that property. The Eagles was sold and is now operating as a church. And the Olson's property, the Save-A-Lot is opening in 2018, and we just found out that the senior center is not going to retain their option on that property. So I prepared a list of potential redevelopment sites for 2017. Properties within the DDA area is given more consideration because they have more grant funding opportunities, and RRC tends to focus on the core of the community, which is the downtowns. So one of the sites, which was actually our top site in 2015 and 2016, 2016 was 28 Arthur Street, which is the former gas station. That's north of town on US 31. 30 Arthur Street and 32 Arthur Street. Those bundled together create a very nice large parcel that would be ready for development. Those were one of the top sites from 2016. We had the former state police post that was not selected as a top site in 2016, but we have been told that the state is going to approve the sale of that property. We have not seen it actually list yet, but that might be an option for a developer. 21 Cypress Street, which is our top 215, 216 site, which is the former mobile station. I'm not sure, were you able to contact McCarthy's?
Yeah, they're still in negotiations.
Yeah, there's somebody who's actually in negotiations on that property. Tyler's my main person, anything in the downtown, he's been my go-to person because he does a lot for the economic development downtown, so we work pretty closely on these sites. We have 302 First Street, which is Slade's property. They still, I think, sometimes open the business. There's an apartment upstairs, but that building is still listed for sale. 77 Hancock Street, the Paintball Extreme, that building has recently sold. They have a purchase offer on property that is owned by Dennis Guerra on First Street that gives them the ability to apply for a special use permit. So that will be coming before the Planning Commission probably in February. 375 River Street is the bank building. Again, that property is up for sale. It's one of our largest buildings downtown. Offers a lot of potential downtown for development. 51 9th Street, which is a former Century Boat property. This is, it was not selected as a top site in 2016, but it is one of the few industrial properties that we actually have for sale in the city now. And it does utilize rail and deep water for the site. 400 River Street, the former Glick's building. That building, there is some discussions on that building right now. Hopefully that'll lead to something later on, but that is one of the top sites from 2015 and 2016. 401 River Street, the city drug building across the street from 400 River Street. My understanding is right now there's a purchase offer on that building, and actually I'm going to be meeting with Tyler, with the potential buyer on that next week. 451 and 453 River Street, that's the Jones building. That was recently put up for sale. The building needs to be cleaned out and stuff for easier access to it, but the upstairs, there's a potential for mixed use with commercial, residential. It is quite a large building. We also have the Johnson's Funeral Home at 480 Washington Street. A very unique piece of property. It all goes straight down to the river. Large parcel that's actually in C2, but mixed use is a use by right in C2, which also lends for a use of a commercial use with a mixture of residential and commercial for that property. Then we have some vacant properties, and if you'll look at the list, you'll notice that we have removed several of those. Washington School property actually has sold. We have new owners for that. We have some property on Cherry Street, the South Properties, which is the Knott property, and the properties owned by the Lutheran Church down by the high school. We have things, the Sand Pit on 31, Consumers property, which they've expressed no interest in selling anything, and some properties by Sam Products. So there has been even some movement on some vacant property in the city. Again, removed from consideration, we removed the church property because it requires a parcel split. We have had no indication from the church if they're even interested in selling any property. Washington School sold. The Radio Hill sold, which is across, we have the mini storage facility that's kind of across where Jim lives on 12th Street. And we actually have a purchase offer on lot 12 and 13 in the industrial park. So the remaining properties are the Sam Products property on 5th Avenue that's vacant, the Adams Street property that Sam Products has on Adams Street, the 55 acres on Murky Road, and actually there is property to the west of that that could be bundled, and that would be over 100 acres of property that would be available for a developer. The Knott property that is over on kind of by where Cherry Hill Apartments is. It's an area over there, quite a large parcel there. And then both properties by the church that's owned on 12th Street. Then we have the large property, which is the sand mining property or operation that's next to MCC. Then we have some vacant properties on US 31. That's where the Blarney Castle used to have a gas station. They actually demoed the building, so now there is a nice 2 large lots on US 31 that would be available for development. And then we have the Consumers property. So those are the properties. Everybody received a list. I think the very interesting thing that we have now is that RRC, before we used to only be able to send in 3 sites for their marketing purposes. We sent 3 sites in for the Opportunity Michigan magazine that goes out there, that they actually produce for each community that's in their program. So it's actually a marketing tool that they use. But we now have access to Zoom Prospector, which means any property that we identify for redevelopment, we can actually place into Zoom Prospector. So anybody coming through could look at properties that are available and they would just list up, and that's something that Tyler and I can do. So I sent everybody a list. I guess the question is there any properties anybody saw that they feel weren't on the list that should be? I'm really trying to stick with properties that are for sale. If somebody doesn't actually have them marketed, I think it's pretty hard to try and market their property for them if they're not actually actively marketing it for sale. No changes? Okay, so,
Do you know of any?
no, I'm the one who did the list to start with. so.
I can't.
Tyler has been really good about keeping me apprised of anything in the DDA. If something comes up between our meetings that's for sale in the DDA, we can add that to Zoom Prospector now, you know. And so it's kind of like they required this meeting, but their program's changing a little bit for their ability to utilize their services for marketing properties. But again, they wanted to have the annual meeting is still a requirement of the RRC program. So that's one reason why we have the annual meeting.
I just want to thank you for all the hard work and keep us up to date. It's kind of impressive to see that all out there and see what's moved and what hasn't, and the properties that are moving and selling. It's real encouraging.
Yeah, I was actually surprised when I went through the list, how many from our original list that, you know, we had such a long list to start with, how many of them have already been marketed. And there's several that have had purchase offers and they've fallen through, but it's not like there's property that people aren't interested. We've had a lot of interest in a lot of properties.
I have a few questions about Zoom Prospector.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a website anybody can get to?
It's something that has to be, it's for the city. We have to actually fill out a form for the property in order to send it into them for their review and consideration to be added to it. But it has to be, it kind of really maintains or sticks into the properties in the downtown.
Okay, and if they're marketed by a realtor, are you providing that information, that contact information, or not?
We haven't reached out because what's going to end up, I could see happening is every realtor wants us to market their property on Zoom Prospector too. It's a kind of a staffing
Well,
issue.
no, if you're going to put, I think from my perspective as a realtor, if you're going to put property on a website, you need to have the contact information of the listing.
Right,
coverage.
right. We will not do anything without the permission of the property owner.
Yeah, that's
So,
another thing.
yes, it's the same thing with us marketing the sites on our website, because we have a list of sites on our website. And you'll see there's a list of sites where we've actually reached out to the property owners, and they have not responded that they wanted to participate. So we just don't follow through if they don't want to participate.
Okay.
A lot of movement this last 2 years.
Yes, there has been. Mm.
The St. Paul's properties,
Mhm.
are those on the tax rolls or are those exempt because they're?
I believe they are. I could double check, but I believe because they have them for sale, they are. Mhm.
Those would support single-family homes and,
Actually, they're large enough for duplex. And about probably 6 or 7 years ago, we actually had somebody interested in doing a multifamily,
okay,
a smaller apartment complex on those.
okay.
Mhm. And that was close to the school, so somebody could easily
Yeah.
have access to the school
That's a
from that
good
location.
location, so.
Mm-hmm. Yep. If nobody has any changes to the list, I think what I'll do is we'll, again, contact the property owners that we identified off of this year's list, see if they're interested in being placed in the program and participating, and if so, we'll go ahead and get their information and move forward.
Could you just elaborate a little bit on that? What do you mean by participate? Do they have to?
Pretty much, I won't put their information on our city website as a redevelopment parcel or property in the city without their permission.
So it's just a permission
Right.
statement they sign? permission-
Yes, what I do is I send them a letter asking them, saying that we annually review sites, that your site has been identified as a site for redevelopment, and we are asking your permission, if you'd like to participate in the program. And if they say yes, fine, I send them one letter. I don't send them 5 or 6. And if they say yes, then they're listed on the webpage. And now they would be listed in Zoom Prospector. Mhm.
Any questions? All right, thank you very much today.
Okay, and we have some members from our boards and commissions here. I know that Glenn Zaring is here from our ZBA, Todd Moore from our DDA. We have Bob from our Planning Commission. And in the back, I have John Perschbacher from the ZBA. I did receive a call from a couple of planning commissioners who were unable to attend today because of previous commitments. Okay,
Thank you.
great, thank you. Oh, and historic district, I'm sorry. John wears 2 hats.
That concludes the agenda items. We go to other. Mr. Taylor, did you have anything?
Nothing.
City Clerk? Public Safety? Public Works?
Nothing, Your Honor.
CFO? City Engineer, any more besides floodplain? Councilmember?
Nothing, Your Honor.
Nothing?
Nothing, my driveway needs plowed if anybody's interested in blowing snow, but they're welcome to come down.
Your sidewalks too?
Huh?
Sidewalks too?
Yeah, sidewalks too.
We'll be right there tonight.
Yeah, nothing. Best wishes for speedy recovery to Councilmember Pontiac. She's missing tonight, recouping at home. Other than that, look forward to next week. Thanks to everybody for being here tonight in the nasty weather. Motion to adjourn?
It's done.
Adjourned.
Yes, that was good.
Okay.
You too.
They are cold.
Don't forget my Christmas present I told you about.
Yeah, I'll bring it. You want the blonde? One that didn't
I
talk?
prefer blonde.
Yeah, one
That
that
one
don't.
blows up because that one took off on me.
Get it all the wind.
Yes, Diane, you still open? You got people there? No?
Huh?
Thank you. I got time to have
just
a
enough
small drink.
Take care of yourself and don't
Okay.
overdo it.
I'll see you shortly.
No, that's for sure.